Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Cinema Savvy. It is myself, George, joined once more by Sam for another entry in the Cinema Savvy Christmas Classic series. The second entry, we are, of course, going to be talking about It's a Wonderful Life today, released in 1946. And oh my, this is one of the heavyweights. Could be going off this straight away. But before we even get into any of that, Sam, how are we doing today?
Very good, thank you. A little bit tired, I'm not gonna lie. It's one. It's the lead up to Christmas is real, and there's a lot of stuff going on. So, of course, I think a lot of people are in the same boat right now, yourself included, George. I know. So, yeah, it's good that we're able to talk about this film though, because it is, dare I say, it's iconic. It's an overplayed, overused word, but I feel like in this case, it's absolutely necessary to define it like that.
Yes, absolutely that. And for people at home that are wondering, saying, what's this video? What's the series? It doesn't say review. It doesn't say discussion on the channel. This is a new series where in the lead up to Christmas, we're doing 2 videos a week. Each video is going to be us talking about a classic Christmas film, a film that we are determining as a classic. We're not following an IMDb list. We're not following a letterbox list or anything. We ourselves are coming up with the schedule. Now, there's only going to be 4 of these before Christmas this year. You can check out our video on the Muppet Christmas Carol, which went up on Wednesday. We are, of course, pre-recording today as well. But we wanted to kickstart with a couple of heavyweights. We've had a light family one. Now we have one of the films some could argue say is the greatest Christmas film ever made. It's certainly one of the reasons we put this as number 2, releasing it on the Sunday, 8 days before Christmas. And before we get into a little bit more of those reasons as to maybe why we picked it, what we're going to talk about, we do want to hear from people at home. So please do comment your thoughts on It's a Wonderful Life. One thing I'd love to know, we're going to talk about something else briefly in a moment, but is this one of the films you watch every year at Christmas? I guess that's a good question we could put on most of these videos, but this one in particular, I know that Cineworld's re-releasing this on Christmas Eve this year. Cineworld do that with a lot of films, but Christmas Eve is It's a Wonderful Life. It's the film that's most associated with Christmas Eve that I've seen online over the years. So I'm very curious about people's Christmas watching habits. So if it's like It's a Wonderful Life, comment the sort of films you watch across this time of year. If you have a certain film on a certain day, that sort of stuff I do want to see. And if you want to find out about other announcements, other videos, obviously, we're doing Christmas stuff. We've done a review for Godzilla -1 in the last week as well. We had a Golden Globes breakdown. We tend to announce videos using our social media feed. So go get us on linktree.com/cinemasavvy, and then you can follow us on any of Facebook, Twitter, Letterboxd, and Instagram for any and all announcements. But before we sort of carry on, Sam, last week we spoke about our favourite Christmas films. And if we had a guest, we'd be asking them that very same question. And kind of, I'm going to hand this over to you. I don't know if you want to ask it me first or if you want to go first, but because we've both done that, we still want to talk about some other Christmas films in a way, just to break the ice for anyone watching new before we really get into this video. So tell us what you've come up with. Because again, for those that didn't watch the first video, this series is your idea, not mine. I'm not taking any credit at all. And people should know that it's your idea because it's been a great series to do so far.
Oh, thank you, George. No, it's been really fun to be part of so far, and I'm glad that we're keeping it going. It's all very exciting. But yeah, I think if there was an additional guest this week, we would have asked about their favorite Christmas film as a kid and as an adult. But as it's us two, again, I was thinking that perhaps we speak about potentially a Christmas film that we enjoy, which either, well, A, is a Christmas film that could be underappreciated or underrated, or one that's not really, as highly regarded as others, or a film that you just watch at Christmas. So it's all the alternative things. So I was talking with George the other day actually about one of them, which I'm going to speak about now because I would recommend it if anyone's not watched it, and it's called Just Friends. And it stars Ryan Reynolds and Amy Smart and Anna Faris. And it was released in, I do have it, I think it's 2005 or 2006 it was. 2005, and it's a really silly film, and I've not watched it in quite a while. But it's one of those ones that I'm definitely going to try and get back to watching before Christmas this year. Just because it's a comedy. It's, I feel like it's kind of what a Hallmark film would be if it had more money. Where it's like guy leaves home, basically has a makeover, turns himself into a great looking guy, then comes back to his hometown accidentally, and mischief ensues. He's now stuck in a place where he didn't really like himself. And to me, Anna Faris is the star of the show. I think she's hilarious in it, but she's hilarious in anything that she does. But yeah, it's one of those things. I don't know if I feel like maybe It's a Wonderful Life is in that film actually, or it is. I feel like It's a Wonderful Life is referenced everywhere anyway. So it might not be in the film, but in any case, it's one of those that I would happily go back to now. If I had a physical copy, I probably would watch it way more, but I've not actually searched out where I can watch Just Friends. But I would recommend finding it, watching it yourself. It's not the greatest Christmas film ever. I'm never going to say that about this film. However, it's an enjoyable watch. And I think a Christmas comedy film, you can't really go wrong with. So that would be my alternative film recommendation for Christmas. So I'm wondering whether you've got one, George, that you think people can enjoy.
Yeah, I feel like I might have spoken about this last week in passing, but I really want to go in this because it's something I actually watched in Christmas last year. I can't remember if it was Christmas Eve. It might have been, or like the 23rd, but Shane Black film. Shane Black's one of my favorite sort of writers. I know he's directed films as well, but he's very much a writer. I enjoy the writing in his work and some of the screenplays he's done aside from directing. For those that have not seen Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, starring Robert Downey Jr., and Val Kilmer, released in, I believe, 2005, maybe 06 if I'm wrong. And there's so many reasons I could talk about this, but the reason I want to speak about this today is I'm not the biggest of Christmas people. I said that in the first video. I'm not going to say it every week. And there's going to be films that are new to me to watch at this time of year, like tonight, which we'll talk about in a bit, to some people's surprise, just like Christmas Carol 2. But I enjoy those buddy cop type films, right? And there's nothing, as far as I'm concerned, from a writing perspective, as you take two completely different characters, take a situation, put them in that situation together, bumbling their way through. Again, it's like a buddy cop's like the genre, but I never see it as that because these two people have come together through differing reasons than what I associate buddy cop films to. But for intents and purposes, let's say it's under that, and it is set on Christmas. It's set throughout Christmas, and for me, that is something I enjoy. Where it's maybe not integral to the film, but the setting helps move that film forward. And in this case, one of the reasons I'm sort of talking about it is because Robert Downey Jr., he's not just one of my favorite actors. So many people are going to say that too. This is really the film that started his comeback. And I know this isn't me talking about like Christmas, the time of year and stuff, but I'm not just talking about Oppenheimer, but I think this is the year Robert Downey Jr. wins his Oscar. And everyone talks about Iron Man. Iron Man 3, Shane Black film, set at Christmas. I wasn't going to recommend that, but you see these things, and The Nice Guys, not set at Christmas, but the last scene takes place on Christmas Eve. I think 5 of his 9 films have been set at Christmas. I've read screenplays, which is pretty wild. But anyway, this is the film that really kickstarted Robert Downey Jr.'s career again. And he's joked about it promoting Oppenheimer that nobody watched it. Like, yes, it wasn't a big hit at the box office, but it's a film that so few people have seen. And I've never come across somebody that's watched it and disliked it. And I think you bring Val Kilmer into it, who obviously, if anyone's seen the documentary Val that came out with himself, I think it was last year or the year before last, when you find out a little bit more about him, it's one of his last great films before he was ill. And the pairing of him and Robert Downey Jr. should just never have worked, but it did. And the industry is a lot better thanks to this film. And I think without Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, we don't have Iron Man. And I know so many people are like, Iron Man's what saved him. I'm like, Iron Man was this. It was the big role that came from him getting back into it. And that's why I'm recommending this. Maybe not for the seasonal aspect, but I really enjoy those alternate Christmas films. And listen, not every film set at Christmas makes it a Christmas film, but there is something about this where it is a key intention for this to be set at Christmas. It plays a part in it. And if you haven't seen it, go and experience it, go and watch it. And I'm also pretty sure I did it in a weird triple bill last year. I'm pretty sure I watched the Val documentary, which was really sort of eye-opening. I really enjoyed it. Then I watched Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. And then I watched a documentary, which I didn't realize would be as devastating as it was, which is called Senior, which is the documentary Robert Downey Jr. made with his dad about his dad's life. And for those who know, Robert Downey Jr.'s dad was a filmmaker as well, very different types of film. And it sort of covers the last years of his life made with him and then covering the passing of him. So for those that are like, we haven't seen Robert Downey doing much, blah, 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 it was because he was shooting this a lot. So it was a really weird triple bill in the end because it's like documentary, film, documentary, but Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. If you haven't seen it, really, I'm not saying we're doing it. It's not one of the next two. I'm not saying it'll be next year or the year after, whatever. But it's a film that is very, very niche, and I think people really enjoy it. It's extraordinarily funny as well.
Well, I was going to say, kind of what you just said about that Lee and Swire Man. I mean, would you quite confidently say that Kiss Kiss Bang Bang is the reason why the Marvel Cinematic Universe exists and is as successful as it is, or it has been?
I'd completely agree. And if you look at it, really, there's a reason why that in Iron Man 3, when oh my god, how I've forgotten his name, director of the first Iron Man was Jon Favreau. When Jon Favreau stepped aside, Robert Downey Jr. brings on Shane Black. That's not Kevin Feige bringing on Shane Black. That is Robert Downey Jr. saying, you're bringing him aboard. And you know what? And I love Iron Man 3. That's set at Christmas, but Iron Man 3, obviously, it had the thing that people hate. It had its Last Jedi, it's split down the middle, all that sort of stuff. But we've also got, I mean, Kiss Kiss Bang Bang's before Zodiac. You have, it's this build-up. You have Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, you have Zodiac, and then I believe he shot Iron Man before Tropic Thunder, but Iron Man hadn't released before he shot Tropic Thunder. So in theory, he'd filmed that in advance. And I just think these are the four films that if I were to summarize IJ's career, I'm not ignoring his early stuff like Chaplin, but it is though that batch of films, his return. And obviously, Iron Man being no denying, obviously it's his most popular role. It is everything, but it was all this build-up, and I love the fact that he is back doing dramatic acting with Oppenheimer, that he's challenging the roles he's done before. I know he's got a TV series due out soon. I know I've distracted this from a Christmas discussion to Robert Downey Jr., but it's what I think when I thought of Christmas last year. And again, it's a great film for people to have a look at if they haven't before. I don't know if you've even heard much about it, or I don't know if you might have seen it, but it's something that's so incredibly niche. It's quite remarkable, if I'm honest too.
Well, I mean, I was going to say, let's just get an "It's a Wonderful Life" remake with Robert Downey Jr. as George Bailey, and we'll see how that does. No, don't remake this film. That's what we're saying. No matter who's in it, don't remake it.
Yes, absolutely. And kind of sticking with that, moving as we talk about It's a Wonderful Life. I know we sort of detracted a little bit. That's my bad, but as we're going to do with these, we're going to talk about the Letterboxd synopsis. Only the second ever time doing this, by the way. We always do IMDb, and Christ Almighty, the Letterboxd synopsis is a paragraph. So, for anyone unfamiliar with this film, It's a Wonderful Life, you're about to have the whole film ruined off this. A holiday favourite for generations, ... George Bailey has spent his entire life giving to the people of Bedford Falls. All that prevents rich skinflint Mr. Potter from taking over the entire town is George's modest building and loan company. But on Christmas Eve, the business's $8,000 is lost and George's troubles begin.
I mean, it sounds like Harry. It sounds like Harry Potter's trying to take over. Really, I mean, I see Mr. Potter and I just go.
I did see the Potter. I was like, do I go for the Potter pronunciate? That was the thing, right? That became a big
celebrity. Oh, like Saint Potter. Like it's all it's all Malfoy. It's all Malfoy's reading and Snape.
Yeah, and listen, I'll tell you this: if I give my first thoughts, I've never seen this film. I knew this was the film deemed at Christmas. I knew the poster being lifted in the air, the DVD covers with the family. I'd never seen a clip of It's a Wonderful Life. I knew nothing to what it was about. I didn't know anything about the story. I didn't know anything about the characters. I just had seen still images, and I just always assumed this is going to be like a make or break film for Christmas. This is going to have me cry. This is going to be talking about the spirit of Christmas. And if you look at Christmas films, there's such a high proportion of them are like, in my eyes, maybe not unfairly, but so many classics seem to be like the early 90s onwards. I'm not saying there's not any classics that aren't that. Maybe it's a generational thing, but when you have a film from 1946 that's still spoken about as highly as anything that's come since, there's a certain bound of expectation from a first viewing in my eyes. And not knowing anything about the story, I think actually really helped watching it on my first impression. And my first impression is it's an incredibly good film. With it being the first time I've seen it, the one thing I will say about Christmas, and I didn't actually think of this with the Muppet video, but Christmas films grow on you as time goes by. And I think the success of a Christmas film comes down to whether you end up rewatching it in another year or not. If you watch one and never again, I think to me that means not that it's failed as a Christmas film, but it was a one and done. Whereas everyone has those core films, right? They'd go back to each year, the films they grew up watching, the films they'd see again and again and again. And I didn't really have the time to think of that or the eloquence on Wednesday until watching this ready for tonight's video. And I was kind of, like I said, not floored after watching it. Dave, who's a big part of the channel, texted me saying I have to say it's the best Christmas film ever made, or don't bother. I'm not going to go that far on a first viewing, but I've certainly thought about it a lot over the course of a day. And it would be interesting in other years to go back to it, because I know this is a traditional film for many people, and I did really enjoy it. And as I said, because I knew nothing, I would not have known what this film was about. When the first opening is obviously like the angels and stuff, and I was like, what am I watching? Like, what? Like, and then as it's going through his life, it's just something I didn't expect. And we'll be talking about A Christmas Carol again a little bit later, no doubt. But I'm curious, segueing over to you, your history with it, because it's 2 in a row now where it's the first time I watched it, which is great because it's 2 new films I've been able to watch, 2 classics as such. But again, we knew this was going to be on the schedule with its legacy, but I just want to get your memories, your thoughts on it too.
Yeah, so I only watched this for the first time, I think, 2 years ago. I've always known about the film, though. Like, it's one of those ones that you know exists. And the thing is, it's been referenced everywhere. And I was trying to, like, write down a list of where I'd seen it referenced. And I was trying to figure out what was the first one I'd seen in it. It was either in Friends or in The Simpsons, because in Friends, it's one of the films that Monica tries to make Phoebe watch to make her feel better. But then Phoebe doesn't get to the end of It's a Wonderful Life because it gets so sad, and then she's like, it should be called A Sucky Life. It's a sucky life or whatever, and she doesn't even finish watching it, which is funny. And then in The Simpsons, there's kind of a visual, when Homer grows his hair and he's like running through Springfield, being like, "Good morning, Springfield," and he's like really happy about it. And it's the same as when George is running through Bedford Falls after he's come back and he's saying Merry Christmas. And so I didn't know that was an It's a Wonderful Life reference at the time, but obviously when I first watched the film I was like, oh right, okay, that's where that's from. And it's been referenced in Family Guy and a bunch of other things. There was a Hollyoaks episode like in 2011 that was based around It's a Wonderful Life as kind of, oh, someone's going to be in a similar situation. And then I'm pretty sure Bonnie Tyler appears as a ghost or something, or someone else does. I don't know. I could be wrong about that, but yeah, it's very weird. But anyway, It's a Wonderful Life is referenced everywhere, so I've always known about it, and I've seen bits of clips. And then a couple of years ago, when I decided, I need to watch more classic films and try watch more Christmas films, this was the one that was kind of at the top of the list. So I saw it for the first time, and I just really enjoyed it. I just, it's really engaging the entire time. And even though I pretty much knew the story, because the amount of references I'd seen, I pretty much knew what was going to happen and how it was going to end too. But just actually seeing it, and I think a big part of the success is James Stewart's performance. He really captures you. And I was emotional at the end the first time I saw it, and then I saw it tonight watching it again, and I sobbed at the end. I don't know how it does it, and I think maybe because as an adult you can relate a little bit more to the themes, and we will talk a bit more about the themes later, but I think it's something where you can understand his points of view. And I don't know if I was a kid watching this film if I would have had the same reaction. I'm going to presume not. But it ends on such a high note that no matter what you were feeling before, it's like, right, it doesn't matter, the world is right. And so I completely understand why people would watch this traditionally annually, because it's such a quintessential Christmas film, and so many films have tried to kind of not replicate it, but try and hit the same emotional beats and the same story beats. And I don't think anything really has. Personally, it's not my favorite Christmas film. However, objectively, it probably is the best, or at the very least in the top 3. and the fact that it's 1946 that this came out, and this is probably the most highly regarded films for Christmas, I think, speaks for itself.
Yeah, and that's what I mean, let's go into this really. As I said, the series, they're not reviews, they're not deep dives, not discussions, they're not all behind the scenes, but we do talk about the film and we sort of look into breaking down as to why it maybe is deemed a classic Christmas film, and where we sort of always go is why do we pick this film in particular? Now, it might not be as not as hard to explain. The legacy of this film is quite clearly, as we said, it's one of the heavyweights. It's one of the most spoken about ones. And kind of doing the series, maybe not this year, maybe next year, there'll be other films that are maybe somewhat wackier or don't have the reputation that others do. But if we're doing a series talking about, Christmas classics, we have to go with some of the heavyweights. It's as simple as that, really. And It's Wonderful Life is absolutely one of those. And what you said there is you might have been able to appreciate it as much when you were younger. I couldn't imagine watching this when I was younger. Not because I was watching stuff like The Grinch, but I don't think a child could appreciate this as much as an adult could. And listen, someone's the opposite way. Comment it, please. Maybe you saw this as a kid and it was a family tradition. But I couldn't imagine a 10-year-old me watching this and understanding it like I did yesterday and having that emotive response. I didn't cry as such, but when you get to the ending, you have been on a journey with a character. And 2 hour 10 runtime in the 40s, I think, is quite long as well. I know runtimes mean nothing in the modern conversation, but so many of these films can be an hour and a half. You think a Christmas film over 2 hours, what's it going to have? And this had precisely what it needed. And yeah, we picked this film because it is deemed the greatest, and we want to look into that. And when we're talking about what makes a Christmas classic, really, there's so many variations. And I guess maybe now we talk about A Christmas Carol very briefly. This story, it was based off of a self-published book that was essentially, I don't know, I've not read it, of course. I think it was 26 pages long, I believe, or began at 26 pages and went into 200-page book. But I said to you, this is like an inverted Christmas Carol, that rather than spending time with a horrid person like Scrooge, actually kind of perfect time we did Christmas Carol, then It's a Wonderful Life now, I think about it. You spend time with Scrooge, and you're seeing the ghosts come to him about the wrongs he has done in his life, and it's about him opening his eyes up to how he could be a better person and better around the people, and the meaning of Christmas, etc., etc., etc. For me, knowing nothing about this film, watching it, I was like, we're following this genuinely lovely person who might have a few faults like anyone else in the world, but rather than us spending time with somebody learning how important Christmas is, we're actually looking at like the good that you can do with humanity. And when you think about Christmas, let's ignore the giving of gifts, let's ignore like the religious aspects of it. Fundamentally, like in my head, Christmas has always been like a family thing. It is the downtime away from work. It is spending time with your loved ones, with your family, maybe reflecting on the year as you begin the next one. It is that sort of final big day for that. And it was really interesting for me on the first viewing with this, figuring more out about these characters. And kind of you mentioned the performance as well, which we're going to talk about, because if it's make or break, if you don't like this lead character, if you're not a fan of it, you're not a fan of the performance, the film's not going to work for you. But George Bailey, seeing him saving his brother as a boy and everything that stems from there, the descent into the darkness for him, and I don't want to get too deep and meaningful, but when this in 1946 for a film to be dealing with stuff like suicide, that's quite, I mean, I don't know my 40s and 50s cinema like maybe other decades, but I'd say it's actually even more important watching this now than then, because that conversation is very much alive and ongoing with people of today, and maybe it's something that people talk more of today, but I actually found it to be quite powerful, and the way in which the story's done is really heartbreaking, seeing someone sort of built up to the best they can be, and then dragged back down to the worst possible scenario. And I really like what this film is doing with that. And again, I don't know, I'm waffling if you want to jump in at this point, but I couldn't believe something as in depth as this was being put into a Christmas film. Because I'm not saying I wouldn't want to watch this at any other time of year, but it's a film that if you watched it in February, it would probably have the same impact as it would in December. And I just found it really interesting, and I don't think I've seen a film such as this. If I have, they've probably just nabbed it from this.
I think that's a really good point, and I do commend the filmmakers for actually showing it. And I think with something like mental health being such an open discussion today, which is a really good thing to be happening, it makes the scenes in this film a lot more poignant. I think most people have had those periods of time where it just seems like everything goes wrong, or that as soon as things get built up again, you're brought crashing down. And when so many bad things happen in a small period of time, it can be really detrimental to your mental health, and can affect how you feel and think. And I know personally, especially over the last couple of years, the last 2-3 years, it's been a really difficult time. And there's times where I've felt really like, oh, under pressure, I don't know what to do. Luckily I've never been in a position that George Bailey was in, but I can easily imagine getting there. I can imagine how he's feeling, and you see it in the performance. How this positive demeanor just goes. Like at the beginning of Christmas Eve, he's so happy, and by the end of it, he's willing to just end it because he feels like no matter everything that he's done, he's failed. And this is where a lot of it, I just blame Uncle Billy. I'm like, you silly man. He's probably the worst, and he's not the worst character in this film, but he's definitely there just because I'm like, you clumsy idiot. If you hadn't have done that, everything would have been fine. But no, I think it's a really bold move. And I think, to have, even though Clarence has been a character since the beginning of the film, to have him really appear in the third act as a physical, embodiment of an angel, I think is a really interesting choice. But that I respect and appreciate how the film is made, and the fact that they break the fourth wall kind of a little bit with it, and like, oh, we're just going to pause this flashback so we can explain who this person is. And yeah, I think it's, from that filmmaking point of view, a really interesting, film. But yeah, the fact that it's a mix of A Christmas Carol with, themes of suicide, yeah, it ends the way it does, and the performances are great. I just think it's very unique in what it did, or at least very unique at the time. And I think that's why a lot of people have tried to draw things from it, because it has a certain magic, I feel, despite how dark it does get.
Yeah, and I think that's what's really interesting, that it does have that magic. And a question I have for you, actually, this is really random, but did you watch this in black and white or colorized, or have you seen either? Because I watched it on Amazon, so I don't have a copy of it. I believe apparently there's been like various versions where it's colorized and when it isn't. The concept of colorization, this is a really weird tangent away from this, but there's something about this that like works so much better in black and white. And when I think of black and white films, obviously a lot of it is to do with age, right? And I hope this makes sense where I'm going. When I think of Schindler's List, a film obviously very different to It's a Wonderful Life, Spielberg spoke, you could read so many interviews with that film, but the choice of black and white was to keep it contextualized, so when people look back, they can see that it was set in the 1940s as it would be in the 1940s, that maybe the coloring wouldn't go different, maybe people wouldn't notice things as much in the set design that might have looked more modern, etc., etc. So there's so much to read into it. Seeing this in black and white, I think, makes a massive difference. I couldn't imagine seeing this in color. I don't think it might make much too difference to some, but seeing the way it was shot, the way the impact of the story, these decisions, the moments, the time you're spending with people, there was something quite artistic about that. And I don't know if it's maybe because I don't watch enough classical films. Like I watched Godzilla 1954 for the first time this week. That's in black and white. Not that I ever come out of them thinking, yeah, that'd be great if they were colorized. But there was something about It's a Wonderful Life where it just works for what it is. It's not trying to be something else. And I know it's telling the story, but even having that old school Hollywood vibe, and again, I know it's a 1946 version, that's even before the 60s studio. I mean, I know it's an RKO Pictures, and they've obviously become so many of the companies as time's gone by, but there's something really unique about this. And you mentioned the magic, and that's what I'm thinking of in my head, the sequences of them on a bridge or them dancing in the auditorium. And I think the black and white's a key reason of that. And I do think recolorization is a fascinating thing. Not that it is a thing, but you see classic images colorized, and I love seeing those. But a film, I don't think I need to see a film colorized. Maybe football, maybe live events, but a film that was shot this way, made this way, I think it really adds to the charm of the film and the story it's trying to tell you. It's not about bright colors, it's not about contrast, it's not about, you're able to focus somewhat more on the story rather than those things you expect. You think of a Christmas film today, right? Not, this is really off point, but there'd be a green Christmas tree, but then the color correction would be all over the place, and then they'd be pushing up certain things, thematics and coloring and this and this and this. But this is so simple, and the story is what carries it above any image. And like I said, I'm waffling, and it sounds like a ridiculous art student. And I said, like, no, it's not a review, but it's just something that's drawing me to this is the black and white imagery. And maybe, as I said, it is the fact I don't see enough black and white films, which is my fault entirely. I'm not passing any blame from that. But does that make any difference to you, or do I just sound like a lunatic?
No, I think it makes a massive difference. I think, black and white TV and film is something that I think really should be respected. In some cases, in most cases, because that's all they were able to do at the time. So I think the idea, well, not even the idea, the actual execution of colorization is a really interesting topic. And I think I'm totally fine with it happening for any form of black and white media, just as long as the original black and white media is intact and available to view, because I would mostly like to watch things in its original form. There's things like, I'll relate it to Doctor Who, so Doctor Who in the 60s was all black and white, and when it moved into the 70s, it moved to colour. And a lot of people will say that when it moved to colour, it lost some of its charm because the sets and the monsters, you could see it more clearly, and it didn't maybe work as well for some people. For others, it made it a lot more easier to understand because you could see it more. There's different perspectives on what it does. They colorized the original Daleks episode for the 60th anniversary, and even though I will still watch the black and white version, I watched the colorized version. It was very interesting to watch, and I would be interested in seeing more done, especially when it's done at a good quality. Now, with It's a Wonderful Life, I've never seen a colorized version of the film. I've not seen a clip of it in color, but I do think I probably would watch it. But I would, again, go back to the black and white. I think there's something very charming about it. And this, when I think of, classic Hollywood, yes, some of those films are in color, but if it's in black and white, I'm going to watch it. That is how the audiences at the time saw it. I'm never going to be one of those contemporary audiences, but as I am now, I would like to see it in as much, and relate to it as much as they did at the time. So, yeah, I do think that brings its own things, and I think, it hides some imperfections and maybe shows off others, but it's what it is. It's how it was made, and I think we should just be glad that what we do have anyway in black and white is of such good quality. It's I love seeing like films and old media anyway that is so well preserved that we can appreciate it to such an extent today. So yeah, I probably would watch a colorized version of this, but whether or not it would have the same impact, I'm probably going to say no for that.
Yeah, no, I'm kind of with you, and it is a really curious one. And kind of sticking with this again, these videos are going to be something different. We're still figuring out, if I'm being honest, how we're approaching them. We spoke about a couple of the themes, and I'm glad you brought the mental health stuff as well, because that is a fundamental part of this, at least in my eyes, watching it in 2023. You kind of get worried when you head into older films, like, could something be said that's out of date? Or I'm not, don't want to sound like one of those sort of social media accounts. I'm not watching classic films to like pinhole and be like, look how disgraceful this is 70 years later. But I did wonder if it's wonderful. Like, could there be anything that just looks or sounds terrible? There wasn't. Not that that means anything, but again, you don't know what to expect from these kinds of films. And looking at some of the discussion points we've had, I want to kind of not talk favorite scenes yet, but I want to kind of ask, before I want to talk about the question I'm going to go with, which everyone's going to ask us to answer at some point in this video, is there anything we're missing that we want to talk about now before that sounds like it's gone too far? Like, we spoke very briefly about the cast, and I kind of want to talk about the direction very briefly. That it is directed by Frank Capra, who I haven't seen any films from. I'm not going to sit there and pretend to be, I know all of this, and this. I know he ended up being head of the Academy, I believe, at some point in the 50s onwards, but his career was declining at this point when this film came out. And I find it really interesting that financially he dropped off from being a big name. Ironically, an Italian director from Sicily who made it to America and Hollywood making films such as this. I really want to talk about the fact this was nominated for 6 Oscars for Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, Best Editing, Best Sound Recording, and a Technical Achievement Awards. And the reason it was nominated for a Technical Achievement Award is it developed a new method of simulating snow on a film set. I love stuff like that. I know they don't do Oscars for things like that anymore, but those early days of cinema, things that we are used to, accustomed to, people forget how groundbreaking that was in certain eras. But we're talking about a Christmas film now that has had some of the highest accolades it could in 1946, the year it come out. Not a case of it grew to be maybe the best Christmas film ever. It has grown to that, but at the time it was still revered. But it's continuously sort of sat at that pinnacle of Christmas films. The AFI list countless. What are your thoughts on that sort of stuff? Like, I know we don't really talk Oscars normally. It's not something we'll do often in these Christmas type of videos, but what do you make of its success? Is that testament to the film's quality at the time, or?
It does, and I think we've got to think of it contextually as well, because I mean, this was released in 1946, so it's a year after World War II ended, and I think that the war is referenced in the film. And I think, I really think the ending is one of, it probably is one of the greatest film endings, ever. I'm sure when, I remember when Channel 4 used to do those like top 100 musicals ever, top 100, cliffhangers, top 100 endings. I'm sure if there was an endings version of that this film would be on there. Because it leaves you on such a high, and it's an emotional high as well. And I think a year after something like, after the war, which was obviously so prominent in everyone's minds, and the repercussions of that was still ongoing then. The fact that you had this guy who wasn't able to fight yet has done all this good, and then actually have all this support from people, and have his brother come back who had fought in the war, and even Clarence says that if Harry had died, then all those men that he saved would have died in the war. And it probably did hit home for a lot of people, even though for us today it's just another bit of dialogue being like, oh, well, it's a good job you didn't die. But at the time it's probably like, oh, that means a lot. This George Bailey is a character that we as an audience are glad is around. So I think that alone really probably helped the film. But as a piece of media, I think the way that it was done was so incredibly well. I love the storytelling to go from hearing all this the diegetic voices of people praying for George Bailey, and then wondering what's happening, and then, like you said, randomly going to the stars and having these angels talk to each other, to then go through George's life and seeing all these key moments happen before we get to his kind of breaking point. There's not really a lot of films I would say at that time would do that. The closest thing I can even think of that off the top of my head is really something like Sunset Boulevard, which starts in present and then tells the film in flashback before going back to the present again. I like the usage of time and seeing what happens through it. And yeah, the fact that this was in 1946 just impresses me a lot. I really give respect to classic films because they really did pave the way for, all the modern techniques. They really laid the groundwork for, all this good stuff that we've got today. It would have to be a pretty terrible film for me to kind of say, this was a travesty to filmmaking or anything. And there's very little that I would say, little films I would say that about, apart from a lot of cheap sequels and things nowadays that happen. But yeah, it doesn't surprise me that it's got nominations and won awards and stuff. It's I think incredibly well deserved.
That's absolutely fair. And kind of segueing with that part too, I want to just kind of jump to you and ask, as I said, these are short, these are somewhat different. I don't want to. It always sounds like a final chapter thing. Like when we say like favorite scenes, that's normally like a closer on our retrospective. But this isn't a retrospective. But is there any scenes you want to talk about in particular? I guess that's probably a better way of saying it because there's so much happening within this film, and I actually want to talk about the whole angel concept because I knew nothing heading into this film, what it's about, what the guidance is. I love the fact that rather than the film begins with George being depressed and we figure out why and then we save him, we are getting the A to Z up to the moment of this man needs our help. We get the entire story up to the moment he then needs help. And I really like the idea to do the what if type story. Like, this is the world. It's not rubbed in our face. This is what happens if you weren't around. This is without you existing. But the way in which they engineer and build up to those scenes, I actually really enjoyed. It felt somewhat different. Again, is that the 1940s? Would that look different if that was today? Would it be some blatant, weird editing techniques? It never felt like that. And I really, really love the whole idea with the angel as well being brought into it. It changed so much of the film for me watching it that, again, it felt like I was watching something new, which obviously it's a new film, but sometimes with classic films, you feel like you've seen that film before because everything's ripped it off. But it's almost felt like no one's ever tried to sort of nab this or to steal what this film has done. I'm sure someone's tried to remake it somewhere. But I've really enjoyed those sequences. And for when you get to the ending, you've had just the right amount of time with the what if type world versus the present heading back into that. I really liked that. And I know I've sort of segued away from a favorite scene type thing, but that final act of this film is where, to me, it really not just clicks, but now I understand why it's so vivid. Now I've had some of the impact that other people have had, and it's credit to then the first hour and a half that's been building up to that is kind of where I wanted to go with it. So it's not like a favorite scene, because I'm more talking about a favorite act, but the bridge sequence I just thought was phenomenal, if I'm honest.
Yeah, I think for me, there's a lot of scenes and moments in this film that you could talk about. I mean, I'm not going to go with the ending just because I've already spoken about it already, and I do think it's fabulous. But I would say in terms of something that I think is a really cute thing is when when George and Mary are walking back from the dance, and he says about pulling the moon down. And I feel like Bruce Almighty references that with Jim Carrey actually pulling the moon. I think it's really cute. So I love that that's referenced throughout the film. But I really think when George comes home and he sits in his chair and he's holding one of his children, and like you just hear the music and he's not talking, but like you just see his face is just going worse and worse, and like you see the tears like coming down in it. I think that's for me like the best part of the performance, is to just see this man crumbling. Like he's home, he's supposed to be happy, safe, he's got his kids around him, Chris, one of his daughters is playing the piano and the Christmas tree is being put up, and yeah, it's a really kind of agonizing moment. And this is when I just applaud James Stewart, because I think he can be, as an actor, he's parodied a lot for his voice and stuff. He's very easy to kind of mock a little bit, but I think he plays it so straight there, and it's just I just think it's fantastic, even though it's awful to watch. So I think that's probably one of like my favorite acting moments in the film. My favorite scene moment is probably again just going to be the ending, which is just so heartwarming.
Yeah, no, I'm kind of with you. And I think if the end, you don't get to the ending, the film just doesn't work. You need that ending, and it's just it's like a heartwarming moment, and the way in which it's been built up to, because we've spent time with this character who's done so much for many others, and you're told that at the start of the film, but then you get to see it develop further and further, as you said, to that lowest point where you just know it's all going to go wrong. The piano in the background, the other kids being around, and so many varying things building up to that moment where it's all too much for him, that he's gonna, consciously he's gonna end his life, and obviously we're glad he doesn't, because then the film won't work. But kind of sticking with that, talking about this, and I don't think it's to be rhetoric, yes or no, but I just want to ask you something that people will want to know. Like, do we think this is the best Christmas film ever made? I know that's a ridiculous statement to answer. I know that every Christmas film is so different, but I've not seen enough to say yes or no. What I will say, not come back to me in a year. off viewing it once yesterday, which shows how little time has been between recording and watching. I can understand any person that's ever said this is the best Christmas film I've made. It's not me sarcastic talking about Die Hard or Jingle All The Way or The Grinch or anything. I have always had this mentality of I know a defining difference between what I enjoy, what is a favorite film, versus what is the best film, what's the best made film, quality, technical, blah, blah, blah. This, quite comfortably, I can see being up there. I'm not going to say yes because it feels too early. There's probably loads I need to see still. I do feel like I've seen a good chunk of the main classics, people might say. But in response to the question, it has to be up there. And as I think you might have alluded to something earlier, if it's not like number one, it's probably sat in the top three. And I think this is something that I might think about for a year, come back to in another year. And if it has that effect on multiple watches, I don't see why not. I can't answer fairly, is it the best Christmas film I've ever seen? But I hope my answer is not that much of a cop-out that in respect of quality, yes, it is right up there. But that depends on your viewpoint. Is it going to be my favorite Christmas film? No. Although I love it, I can't put this with others. It's too new. It's too different to what I enjoy and what I look for out of a Christmas film.
I feel like no one said It's a Wonderful Life is too new in like what 70, 80 years. So yeah, I think subjectively, no. Objectively, I'll give a soft yes. I think about everything with this film, like when because it's all about George, and as a kid, he's like we don't see a lot of it, but his relationship with Mr. Gower, and just all the sacrifices that this person has done just to make his family, his town happy, and to do the right thing. And I think that's the message to take away. And I love when there's a very clear, simple message, and it's not all the bells and whistles. It's just saying, look, do the right thing, be there for people, and they'll be there for you too. I felt like I was about to sing the Friends theme song, but it was just I like again, to go back to the ending, like you can't get that ending without seeing all these things that George has done that means that he gets that reward. And he's done all this stuff not to get a reward, but really to just be a good person and to survive. We've seen this person who's wanted to escape his hometown pretty much since he turned into an adult, but he's never been able to do so. And so it feels right that this person gets given something back from that town, and all these people who know his name and who he's helped, so that it doesn't become Pottersville, it stays Bedford Falls. So I think I've only watched it all the way through twice, but if someone said to me It's a Wonderful Life is the greatest Christmas film, I wouldn't argue one bit. There's a lot of Christmas films out there, and there's a lot that both of us have not seen. So there could be one out there that we may think, what, this takes the cake. This is better than It's a Wonderful Life, but it stood the test of time. I think it always will. It's a Christmas classic, and I think it's always going to remain one. So yeah, I will give a yes to this is the greatest Christmas film. We've still got 2 more films left this month to talk about, but so we never know. One of those could knock it off, but yeah, we'll see. Right now, I feel comfortable saying that. Soft yes, but definitely a yes.
No, and that's lovely. And I know you're fairly, I don't say new to it, but you mentioned you'd seen it for the first time a couple of years ago, and listen, you can say about any film, but when it's Christmas, everyone knows you're only selectively watching them at a certain time of year. And I do like that. It is something I'm curious about moving forward. And kind of sticking with that, talking about today's video. I know that's kind of a final thought. Like, how do you get past a final thought of calling it the best Christmas film ever made? I just want to say that it was more so for me. My final thoughts talking about this film, at the series you're doing, this rightfully sits in this category, doing a series such as this, and it should be done on the first year. Even if I disliked this film, we could find some ridiculous reasons to why, but it should still be in this conversation. That's just my viewpoint. And if we're putting together this I don't know what we're calling the series. I know it is Cinema Savvy's Christmas Classics. It's what we are determined to be a Christmas classic. This is absolutely one. And as I said, it's not just about ticking one off, saying I've seen something I haven't seen before. It's about figuring more into that like sort of spirit of Christmas for me that isn't big on stuff like that. It makes it more exciting doing a series like this, which is why I'm glad you brought it to my attention, because it wasn't just let's talk about 5 Christmas films we love. It was let's do ones we've not seen, let's do ones we have seen, let's do what's deemed one of the best, let's do something that's maybe a bit more niche that has a following, or maybe something that's underappreciated. And Christmas should encompass all those kinds of things. And this film is the epitome of those things in respective of stature. And I'm glad that we've covered it early, and I'm very glad that we've had a good discussion on it. I know this is going to be longer than maybe some of the other ones we do, but when you're talking of a film of this legacy and its elitism, it's going to be a little bit longer than maybe some of the videos. But Sam, over to you, because you've put in these Christmas terms far more eloquently than I can. Final thoughts on It's a Wonderful Life?
I don't think
hard,
so. No, I mean, to go back to kind of why we chose this film, one of the reasons why, like, I kind of really did want to push for this was because George hadn't seen it, and I think it's one of those films where you really need to. There's some films that people will never watch, and they'll have it, and people will have an opinion on it. And with this film, I feel like you really need to see it to really, gauge what it actually is. And I think there's a lot of people of our age who, maybe haven't seen it. I can imagine older generations have had much more exposure to this film, whereas nowadays there's so much out there that not that this film could get missed, but I think it's known as a classic, and for some people, oh, it's a classic, yeah, I'll get around to watching it, or maybe whatever, rather than actually going ahead and watching it when they think of it. So, and I think that's partially, why I didn't watch it for so long, because I was like, oh yeah, I'll get to it eventually. And I think that's why we've got to be a little bit more proactive in trying to watch, media from across the generations, because, I think it's important to have the different contexts and to kind of appreciate the things that have come in the past. And yeah, the reputation of this film precedes it. I'm very happy to have been able to speak about it and to just watch it again. It's probably not the one that I would go to at Christmas. It's not, but I wouldn't pass up the opportunity to watch it. And yeah, I just hope that, if anyone's watched this who hasn't seen it, go ahead and watch this film. You've been spoiled anyway, but absolutely watch it. You'll feel great at the end. And if you've seen it before, watch it again. It's a fabulous time. And even though I do feel a little bit like Phoebe and Friends, it all gets so bad I don't really want to watch anymore. To know where it's going and why this is happening, why we're being told this story, it's a perfect ending. So absolutely go ahead, watch it. Final thoughts. It's one of the greatest Christmas films, if not the greatest Christmas film, and it's one of the greatest classic films. Full stop.
Excellent, and so eloquently well put. So people at home, please do that. As we said earlier, comment your thoughts. We want to know if you've seen this film, where this stacks up. Is it like your favorite Christmas film? Do you think it's the best Christmas film? Do let us know. And as I said, there are a couple more of these videos, because we're going to be having another upload this Wednesday, the 20th of December. I've alluded to this a couple of times recently, but we've gone from one of the biggest heavyweights, we've gone from a classic comedy, and now we're going into a slightly different path. We're going to be doing a video on Jingle All The Way, which of course is a Christmas film. Jake Lloyd, Arnold Schwarzenegger, absolute classic, maybe a certain age group, a film, one of those films you get older and you discover some people don't like it. How? But we're going to be doing Jingle the Way next, which is very exciting. We kind of knew we'd be doing that, right? And that was on the board very early.
It's definitely a George pick, and then as soon as he said it, I was like, yes, let's do it. I've not seen that film for about 20 years, so I'm so excited to kind of get an adult Sam's perspective on Jingle All The Way. So yeah, I'm very excited.
This is it, and we're going to be talking about it on Wednesday, so it'll be a very different video probably to how today's one goes. Still about the spirit of Christmas, loads of other things, and we're excited to talk about it. So, as I said, go get us on our social media, linktree.com/cinemasavvy, Facebook, Twitter, Letterboxd, Instagram. They're all on there. Redbubble store if you want to pick up any merch. We've got the lovely little Christmas logo. By the time this video goes up, it might be on our socials. Maybe, who knows? Can I do an edit? Probably should do. So, yes, there's a lot happening on the channel. Aside from that, we've had reviews for Godzilla -1. We've got the weekly Friday film recommendation. There's a lot of things happening at the moment. We're planning stuff into the new year. We're into award season. We're going to be doing far more discussions. The Golden Globe nominations were up last week. So we're in a period of a change somewhat. There's some new shows to start, to be planned, that we'll announce as soon as we can announce them. And in the meantime, we're going to continue celebrating and building up to Christmas. So once again, thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Sam, for not just the series here, but for being on for the first 2 episodes. And we'll see you all on the next one. Take care.